Welcome back, everyone. This is Chapter 4, Behaviorism, Part 2. Now, last time we talked about classical conditioning. This time we're going to talk about operant conditioning. If you remember, the difference between classical and operant conditioning is classical conditioning is when the outcome behavior is a natural behavior. It's just happening for a strange reason, right? Operant conditioning is when we get a brand new behavior that's really not natural, that doesn't happen before. Okay. Whenever we want to create a new behavior, we either need to, if we want to create a new behavior, we reinforce that behavior. We could also do the opposite, and that is we could stop a behavior from happening. And that's called punishment. Reinforcement versus punishment. Reinforcement happens when you want the behavior to continue. Punishment happens when you want a behavior to stop. Now, when you talk about positive reinforcement or positive punishment or negative reinforcement or negative punishment, people get confused unless they separate the terms out. Separate reinforcement and punishment away from positive and negative. Those are different things. So let's first talk about reinforcement versus punishment. If you want the behavior to happen more, you reinforce. It's either going to be positive or negative reinforcement, but you reinforce if you want the behavior to happen. If you don't want the behavior to go on anymore, you punish. I don't care if it's positive or negative punishment. If you don't want the behavior, you punish. So, reinforcement if you want it to continue, punishment if you want it to stop. Positive just means adding something. Negative just means taking something away. So let's think about some specific things. Let's say that I want you to do your homework. So, if I want you to do your homework, then I have to do reinforcement. If I want you to do your homework, I must do reinforcement. If I want the behavior, homework, to continue, I have to reinforce it. Let's say that I don't want you to swear. Then, if I don't want you to swear, I must use punishment. Whether it's positive or negative, that's a separate question. But I must use punishment. So I want you to do your homework. So what do I do to have positive reinforcement? So positive means adding. So I need to add something to you when you do your homework. Follow me on this? So I add something to you when you do your homework. I positively reinforce the behavior of homework. So I could give you a star on your paper. I could give you a candy bar every time you do your homework. I could give you $20 every time you do your homework. That would be positive reinforcement. Remember, positive means adding something. Now, what if I don't want you to swear anymore? What can I add to you that would make you stop swearing? So remember, positive means adding something, and punishment is stopping a behavior. So positive punishment for swearing would mean I need to add something. For example, pain, right? If somebody got spanked, that would be positive punishment. You're like, whoa, that's not very nice. It doesn't sound very positive to me. Now, I don't care about whether it's nice or mean. That's not what positive and negative is about. Positive punishment means adding something. In this case, we're adding pain. So if I want you to stop swearing, then I can hook you up to some electrodes and I shock you every time you swear. That would be positive punishment. Negative just means taking something away. So let's say that I want you to do your homework. What would I take away that would encourage you to do your homework? This case, what we would normally do is we take away something like nagging, right? Let's say that I am constantly nagging you. Do your homework, 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 do your homework. Then you do your homework and I stop. I take away the nagging. That would be negative reinforcement. I take something away so that you continue doing a behavior. Let's say that you really hate the smell of my shoes. And so, if you do your homework, I take my shoes out of the room. That would be negative reinforcement, taking away something for behavior to continue. Now, what about negative punishment? Negative punishment means I need to take something away for you to continue. Sorry, I said that wrong. Negative punishment is I need to take something away for you to stop doing a behavior. So whenever your parents put you in timeout, they were taking away your playing so that you would stop a behavior. So if I hear you swearing, I'm like, oh, you have to stop playing for 10 minutes. That would be negative punishment. I'm taking away something to stop a behavior. All right, so here's a question for you. If I take away your Xbox every time you fail an assignment, that would be, well, I'm assuming that I don't want you to fail the assignment anymore. And I'm assuming that you like your Xbox. So if I want you to stop failing, so I take away your Xbox, that would be negative punishment. Negative because I'm taking away the Xbox. Punishment because I don't want you to fail anymore. So I want to punish the behavior of failure by taking away your Xbox. All right. When we're creating a new behavior, if you remember when we're talking about operant conditioning, we want a new behavior. So think about if you were like trying to teach a cockatiel to roller skate, you're going to have to give some reinforcement at certain intervals. Okay. Now, we normally don't give the reinforcement every time that behavior happens. So if the cockatiel moves its feet, I wouldn't give a seed. I wouldn't give a piece of fruit or a seed to the cockatiel every time it moves their feet inside of the skates. I'd run out of seeds and the cockatiel will get full. So instead we use schedules of reinforcement. Now, if you did give the reinforcement every time the behavior happened, that's what we call continuous reinforcement schedule, right? You do it every single time. However, we often don't have enough seeds for that, and so we try and create a schedule of reinforcement. Now, theoretically, you could do a schedule of punishment as well, but we call it a schedule of reinforcement because normally we only do this for reinforcements. Punishment is really only effective when it happens basically every time a bad behavior happens, and it has to happen consistently, right? And like right away. So it's got to be consistent and it's got to be persistent, right? So immediate and persistent. All right. Schedules of reinforcement. So let's say that I have you as an employee and you are going to pass out flyers for me. So the behavior that I want to reinforce is passing out a physical piece of paper. I don't have enough money to give you $1 every time you pass out a flyer. I'm going to run out of dollars if you do that. So I've got to create a schedule of reinforcement. I'm only going to give you the $1 at certain times. Just like we did with positive and negative and with punishment and reinforcement, we're going to separate these two concepts of fixed and variable and ratio and interval. So let's talk about ratio first, and then we'll talk about interval. Ratio means that I'm going to reinforce you based off the number of times you perform the behavior. So remember, pass out flyer is the behavior. I will give you a reinforcement based off the ratio of flyers to reinforcement. So let's say, for example, after you give out every 20th flyer, I give you $1. Interval, on the other hand, is based off of time, literal minutes, that kind of a thing, time. So instead of paying you based off of how many flyers you pass out, that would be ratio. Interval would mean as long as you're passing out any flyers during this interval, I will give you reinforcement during that interval. Okay? A fixed ratio means that the ratio is fixed. A fixed interval means the interval is fixed. So it's the same number of flyers versus the same amount of time, right? It's fixed. Variable, on the other hand, means that it's not going to be exactly every 10th flyer you pass out or 20th flyer you pass out. It's not going to be every exact hour where you're being paid. So let me give you some examples here. That's you. You are passing, you're in the tiger costume, you're passing out the flyers, right? A fixed ratio means exactly every 20th time you pass out the flyer, I give you $1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. 20, I give you the dollar. Now, if that took you 10 seconds, you get the dollar. It doesn't matter. If you took it 10 days to do that, doesn't matter. You get the dollar. It's based off of the number of times you perform the behavior. It's based off of how many times you pass out the flyer. And it's fixed. So it's exactly every 20th flyer, you get a dollar. Interval is you get, as long as you've been doing the passing out the flyer, I will reinforce you. I'll give you a dollar every I don't know, not every minute. That's too many dollars. Every 5 minutes that you pass out the flyers, I give you a dollar. If it's a fixed interval, that means exactly every 5 minutes, I'll give you the dollar. As long as that behavior's been going on during that fixed interval, I give you the dollar, right? Doesn't matter how many you passed out during that hour. I always just give you the dollar every hour, as long as you've been doing at least some passing out. As long as you pass out at least one flyer in the hour, you get $1. If you passed out 20 in that hour, you still only get $1. If you pass out one, you get $1. It's based off of the interval of time, not the number of flyers you pass out. Now, variable ratio means that you get the reinforcement not based on an exact ratio of pass out flyers to dollars, but the ratio varies. So what happens is you start passing out flyers, and then I'm just standing by you, right? You pass out 3 flyers, I give you a dollar. And you pass out 10 flyers, I give you a dollar. You pass out 6 flyers, I give you a dollar. You pass out 16 flyers, I give you a dollar. You pass out 12 flyers, I give you a dollar. You don't know when the dollar is coming, but overall it will average to a certain amount. It'll average out to, let's say, 10 flyers per dollar. A slot machine is an example of a variable ratio reinforcement schedule. Let's pretend that the behavior we want is pull the lever. You don't know exactly how many times you need to pull the lever in order to get the jackpot, right? It varies. It's variable, but it's not based off of time, right? It's not like if you sit there for 10 hours, you're sure to get the jackpot. That's not what's going on. It's based off of actual times you pull the lever. That behavior has to happen. And at some point, you're going to get that jackpot. That is a variable ratio. In fact, of all the schedules of reinforcement, the variable ratio is the most effective for an organism to continue that behavior. If you want somebody to do a behavior, the variable ratio reinforcement schedule is going to be the most effective. The variable interval reinforcement schedule is more like a certain amount of time has passed. Now, let's assume that I want to reinforce my dog. And I think in this one I have a picture of like fishing, right? So you can think about this as like, you know, how many hours you have your fish in the line. I actually I'm thinking about a better example. So let's do my example instead. Let's say that I want my dog to do the dishes, right? Okay, I want my dog to do the dishes. I don't come home at exactly the same time every day. Sometimes I come home at 3, sometimes I come home at 5, sometimes I come home at 7 p.m. Doesn't matter. When I come home, I look and I say, hey, Fido, did you do the dishes? And I look over and the dog did the dishes. As long as the dog has done the dishes at least once during the time between the time I left and the time I got home, I will give the dog a reinforcement, a biscuit. If the dog did the dishes 20 times, only 1 biscuit. And you'll notice that the schedule is not every 24 hours. It's not exactly at 7 p.m. every day. That would be a fixed interval. Instead, sometimes it's at 3, sometimes it's 7, sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 5:30. It's not exactly 24 hours. It's a variable interval, right? Sometimes it's 23 hours, sometimes it's 27 hours. It varies, but it averages out to be 24 hours. Most jobs in the United States are paid on which of these schedules? Most jobs in the United States are paid on a fixed interval schedule. If you get paid by the hour, or the year, or the month, or every 2 weeks, you are on a fixed interval schedule. You are only on a fixed ratio schedule if you get paid on pure commission, right? Like you only get paid after you sell the third car, right? 1, 2, third car, you get the commission. 1, 2, third car, you get the commission. 1, 2, third car, you get the commission. That would be a fixed ratio. Doesn't matter how long it takes you to sell 3 cars, whether it's 1 day or 20 days, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. All right. A company rewards loyalty with a 6% raise on average about every 3 years. That somebody's with a company. Some people get it sooner, some people get it later. What kind of schedule is this? This is a variable interval. It's based on time. In this case, the time is years, and it varies, right? It's not exactly every 3 years. Some get it sooner, some get it later. It varies. It's a variable interval reinforcement schedule. All right, we need to talk about something called shaping, because it turns out that sometimes we want behaviors that are a little complicated. So for example, teaching a cockatiel to roller skate, or teaching a rat to play basketball. So shaping is the differential reinforcement of successive approximations towards a target behavior. All we're saying is, how do you get a rat to play basketball? Shaping is the way you do that. It's the little bits of reinforcement that you give for each of the separate steps. And we'll go through the different parts here until you finally get the rat to play basketball. So if you can tie your shoelaces, you probably learned this based off of a shaping behavior. So tying your shoelaces would be the outcome, the actual behavior. But what you did is you learned successive approximations, little bits, right? Like first you learn to make the little loop. Then you learn put the lace around the other loop, right? Those are the small parts, the steps. Those are called successive approximations towards the final behavior, which is the target behavior. So what if you wanted to make a rat play basketball? Well, let's watch a video about people teaching rats to play basketball. So in that video, you saw that they trained the rats to play basketball. And by the way, that was part of their class. That's how that was the class, teach the rats to play basketball, right? What they did is the outcome behavior is making the rat play basketball, okay? The successive approximations would be the small steps you would need to reinforce the rat before they actually pick up the ball and put it in the hoop. So how would you think about this. How would you train a rat to grab the ball and drop it in the hoop? Well, the first thing you got to do is reinforce it for actually touching the ball. Then you reinforce it for picking up the ball. Then you reinforce it for going toward the hoop. Then you reinforce it for putting the ball in the hoop. You do the successive approximations, the little steps. So go ahead and watch this video about how people have done this exact thing. Now you notice in that video that they actually gave the reinforcement, the food, for the small steps. First touch the ball, then pick up the ball, then they'd already taught it to come, right? So then lifting up and touching the rim, etc., right? Those are the successive approximations. The target behavior is put the ball in the hoop, right? The successive approximations are the small steps towards getting there. Differential reinforcement means that you're going to give different amounts of the reinforcement, different amounts of food, generally that's the reinforcement, until you get to the behavior. So you give one piece of food when the rat touches the ball. You give one piece of food when it picks up the ball. One piece of food when it gets close to the net. But when it actually puts the ball through the hoop, you give a lot of food. You want the organism to associate the actual behavior with the most reward. So let's assume that we're teaching our kid to potty train. And I've done this. It is an interesting time, right? So let's say that in this case, the target behavior is go pee-pee in the potty, right? That is the target behavior. And we're going to reinforce using gummy bears. Well, what you would do is you would give one gummy bear. You would give one gummy bear for pulling down your pants. One gummy bear for lifting up the toilet seat. One gummy bear for sitting on the potty. But when the actual tinkling happens, You give a lot of gummy bears. Differential reinforcement. So the differential reinforcement is the amount of the reinforcer, the amount of whatever you're using to reinforce the behavior, right? It's the amount of the reinforcer changes. You give more when you get to the target behavior. Successive approximations, those are the steps. The target behavior is the outcome that you actually want. Well, the jackpot, when the organism actually does what it's supposed to do, we call that a jackpot. And you give a lot of reinforcement to make sure that they know what it is. You can't get the jackpot every time, though, because the actual animal will get too full, and that'll be not good for you. All right. So this is the point. So use as little reinforcement as possible as necessary so that you avoid satiation. Satiation is when the animal gets full, right? And if the animal's full, the reinforcement's not going to work anymore. If my son or daughter is totally full and doesn't want any more gummy bears, then the gummy bear is not reinforcing anymore, and it won't help me at all in teaching how to potty train. That's the idea of satiation. Okay, we're going to watch an activity, and this is something you can do. In fact, I encourage you to ethically do this with another person. So you're going to actually watch me do this game with my daughter. My son is there as well. One of my sons is there as well, but my daughter's the one who's actually going to play the game. So go ahead and watch this video. So in that video, you saw my daughter Eve, and we were trying to shape her behavior. In this case, the reinforcement was the word good, and she had to just kind of guess whatever it is. So what she was really doing is she's acting like an animal, like a rat or a dolphin or a pigeon or a cockatiel. They don't know what you want them to do. They're just kind of acting randomly, and then they get reinforcements for certain things. And then finally, we give a different amount of reinforcement. We give more reinforcement when we finally get to the actual behavior that we want, which in that case was jumping jacks. All right? The little bits, the little parts to get her to that point, like lifting herself up or raising her arms, those are the successive approximations until she finally got to the target behavior, which was a jumping jack. Now, you can do this with any person. It's quite interesting. You'll notice, though, that sometimes people will actually kind of fixate on a behavior. So now, I don't know if you remember in that little video, Eve was kind of stuck on kneeling, right? She kneeled up a couple times because she thought she was being reinforced for kneeling on the ground. In reality, I was trying to reinforce her for raising herself up off of the ground. But she didn't know that, right? She just knew that she got a reinforcement. And so she actually thought that she was being reinforced for kneeling. Well, let me ask you a question. Do you ever press a button for an elevator or for a walk signal? Do you ever press it more than once? If you do, then you are doing what's called a superstitious behavior. And you're like, oh no, if I push it lots of times, it's going to come faster. I know because I was pushing lots of times one time and the door opened. So that's what's really going to help. Pushing lots of times is going to help. In reality, it's not going to help. It's not going to help at all. You felt like you're being reinforced. So the reinforcement was the door's opening. You felt like you were being reinforced for this action. The behavior was lots of pushing the buttons. In reality, you were only reinforced for pushing it once, not many, many times like that. In the same way, a superstitious behavior is one where an organism, an animal or a person, thinks that they are being reinforced for a behavior that they're not being reinforced for. So, for example, my daughter thought she was being reinforced for kneeling up, when in reality she was being reinforced for just kind of raising herself off the ground. Go ahead and watch this video, and this video is of B.F. Skinner and the Skinner box. So in that video you just watched, B.F. Skinner was the guy, and he is probably the most famous behavioral psychologist. In fact, if you've watched the Pixar movie Inside Out, Inside Out's a different one, Ratatouille. If you watch the movie Ratatouille, the evil chef, the bad guy chef, his name is Chef Skinner. Why? Because he puts rats in a box and makes them do weird behaviors. Well, B.F. Skinner would put organisms, pigeons, rats, etc., in a box, which we actually call a Skinner box, and teach them to do strange new behaviors, like a backflip, like turning around in circles, like whatever, pecking a button, that kind of a thing. So what happened in this particular video was the pigeon thought it was being reinforced for one thing when in reality it was for something else. Okay, let's go ahead and do some review questions. This is for the whole chapter, not just for this video. Your friend is afraid of clowns. Which concept from behavioral psychology could help be applied to reduce the fear? So the actual answer is all of the above. We didn't really talk about counter conditioning. Counter conditioning is when you actually have a positive experience associated with what was normally a negative experience. So let's say that I was afraid of clowns. So what you would try to do is you would try and associate clowns with pleasure. So maybe you would give me food, and I associate the clown with food every time I was around the clown. Systematic desensitization, that's the same thing we did with the spiders, right? Start with the picture, then the toy, etc. Habituation and flooding are the same thing for us. They're the same thing, right? You just have a million clowns in the same room with you until you get over it. That's what it would be. Habituation is a concept from which one? Classical, operant, or both conditioning? Habituation comes from classical conditioning. Classical conditioning. Habituating, we're trying to get rid of a classically conditioned pairing. So a classically conditioned response, we're trying to get rid of it. We can do that through habituation, which is the same as basically like flooding. Okay, thanks everybody.